If you order a brand new Boeing 737 MAX today, you're looking at delivery after 2030. The Airbus A320neo, the same story. The backlog is so bad that airlines are stuck, and the duopoly that has controlled commercial aviation for decades is facing a problem they cannot fix. But here's what almost nobody expected. Airlines that dismissed Chinese aircraft years ago are now in serious talks to buy them. AirAsia's CEO confirmed active discussions to acquire COMAC C919s, calling it a fantastic aircraft that the West isn't taking seriously. When Ryanair's Michael O'Leary mentioned considering it, a US congressman literally wrote him a letter warning him to back off. This isn't about China suddenly building the perfect plane, it's about desperation meeting opportunity at exactly the right moment. And what happens next could permanently change who builds the aircraft you fly on. The numbers paint a stark picture. At the end of 2024, Airbus and Boeing delivered 867 A320neo and 737 MAX aircraft. The Airbus A320neo family's 2024 backlog alone was over 7,200 aircraft. That's not a supply chain problem. We're talking not enough factories, not enough workers, not enough suppliers to build them fast enough. IATA projects these disruptions will cost airlines more than $11 billion in 2025 alone. Airlines are being forced to extend the operational life of older, less fuel-efficient jets, burning more fuel, costing more to maintain, and disappointing passengers. Unless you're like me and quite like flying on older planes, I'm looking at you, Lufthansa, with your A340s. The 777X was promised for 2020. Now, the best-case scenario is 2027, 7 years late. If you're an airline CEO trying to expand routes or replace aging jets, you're literally stuck. Order today, wait until the end of the decade. Most carriers are being quoted delivery slots into 2030 or beyond. This desperation creates an opening for COMAC. But what makes this different from every other attempt to break into commercial aviation is timing. For the first time in decades, airlines might be desperate enough to take the risk. The COMAC C919 isn't new. China's been working on it for over a decade. It made its first commercial flight in May 2023 with China Eastern Airlines. On paper, it slots right into the mission profile of the A320neo and 737 MAX. It seats 158 to 192 passengers, and it has a range of 4,075 to 5,555 kilometers, enough for all short-haul routes across Asia, Europe, or the Americas. The C919 also delivers fuel burn comparable to the A320neo and 737 MAX, with 15% savings over older models via LEAP engines and composites. But here's what changes everything about how you need to think about the C919. It's not some isolated Chinese experiment built in a closed system. No. The engines, as mentioned, they are LEAP engines, which are from GE Aerospace and Francis Safran, the exact same engine family powering the A320neo and 737 MAX. Avionics from Honeywell mixed with Chinese domestic systems, landing gear from Liebherr, flight controls from Moog and Honeywell. COMAC is doing final assembly and integration. That's exactly how Airbus and Boeing operate. They're all systems integrators working with sprawling global supply chains. This heavy reliance on Western subsystems is temporary. China's developing a domestic engine right now, the CJ1000A, but it's years away from production-ready certification. Right now, COMAC needs these Western suppliers. That dependency is both a strength and a vulnerability we'll come back to. China Eastern, Air China, and China Southern are the primary operators, with 12, 7, and 7 aircraft respectively. At this point, the C919 is working commercial aircraft flying real passengers every day, which brings us to the question, why would airlines outside China suddenly care? All about leverage. First, the price. The C919's list price is cheaper than the A320neo or 737 MAX. Factor in the potential Chinese subsidies or other benefits, and it might become even cheaper. Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary stated he'd consider ordering the C919 if it were 10 or 20% cheaper than a comparable Boeing or Airbus aircraft. O'Leary is famously obsessed with every dollar of operating cost. For him to even mention a Chinese jet publicly tells you something fundamental has shifted. Then, the second is delivery speed. This is the key advantage right now. COMAC told Brazilian carrier Total Linhas Aéreas that they could potentially deliver aircraft within 6 months of their talks back in September 2024. Airbus and Boeing, they've been quoting 2030s delivery timelines. For airlines desperate to grow or replacing aging fleets, that timeline difference isn't just convenience, it's the difference between expanding now or watching competitors who ordered planes years ago take your routes. Third, the mere threat of the C919 gives airlines negotiating power with Airbus and Boeing for the first time in decades. Airlines had nowhere else to go. Now they do. Give us a better deal or we'll talk to COMAC. That sentence has never been possible before. Now, let's get specific. Real airlines are in real discussions. As mentioned earlier on in the video, AirAsia is the biggest name. CEO Tony Fernandez confirmed that the carrier is in active discussions to buy the C919, positioning AirAsia as the first major foreign carrier to work with COMAC. AirAsia and its subsidiaries operate hundreds of Airbus A320 family aircraft. Even a small order would be symbolically massive for COMAC's credibility. Total Linhas Aéreas in Brazil is also negotiating to potentially operate the C919. They're exploring an order for up to 4 C919s for charter and ACMI operations. Malaysia Airlines is also evaluating the aircraft. Beyond confirmed talks, other Southeast Asian carriers are being courted. Cambodia's Air Cambodia signed a letter of intent for up to 20 COMAC C919 regional jets in September 2025. The pattern is clear: Southeast Asia, Latin America, and potentially Africa, regions where Chinese infrastructure investment is already strong, and where financing matters more than brand prestige, and where certification requirements might be a little more flexible. These aren't Tier 1 Western legacy carriers, but they are real airlines flying real routes with real passengers, and that's exactly how you break into a market. Then, as we touched upon before, we have Ryanair, and this is where things get politically sensitive. Ryanair is Europe's largest low-cost carrier. Their entire fleet is Boeing 737s, over 600 of them. They're one of Boeing's biggest customers. In March 2025, Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary said that if the C919 was cheap enough, 10 or 20% cheaper than an Airbus aircraft, Ryanair would order it. O'Leary has a history of using public threats to extract better deals from Boeing. He once claimed he'd order Airbus jets if Boeing didn't lower prices. Boeing called his bluff. He stayed with Boeing. But this time, the response was different and immediate. US Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy wrote directly to O'Leary, warning that US and European airlines should not be contemplating the purchase of airplanes from Chinese military companies. He cited COMAC's ties to the Chinese military. O'Leary responded that Ryanair would reassess its current Boeing orders if US tariffs materially affect the price of Boeing aircraft exports to Europe. This highlights a critical point. A US congressman felt compelled to intervene in what would normally be a routine commercial aircraft negotiation. And here's where the real power dynamics reveal themselves. COMAC isn't just selling aircraft, they're selling access to the Chinese market. For airlines in countries with strong China ties, buying Chinese aircraft carries benefits beyond the purchase price: favorable financing, infrastructure investment, political goodwill. COMAC has already inked deals with regional players. Lao Airlines took delivery of 2 C909s. Vietjet leased the C909s for a 6-month trial, ending in October 2025. Negotiations with Garuda Indonesia could see the C919 fly under the nation's flag carrier. China's strategy is clear: use Belt and Road partnerships to create aviation ecosystems that lock in long-term dependence on Chinese platforms, training, maintenance, and supply chains. For Western governments, this is a concern. Aviation isn't just civilian infrastructure, it's dual-use technology with military applications. Supply chain dependencies in critical sectors create vulnerabilities. That's why the congressman wrote to Ryanair. The US isn't worried about Ryanair specifically, they're worried about what happens when the floodgates open. So, how is Airbus and Boeing responding? Well, Boeing is focusing on safety and working to fix its quality system, with plans to increase 737 MAX production in the next few years. but they're still constrained by regulatory oversight. Airbus delivered 766 aircraft in 2024 compared to Boeing's 348. The growing gap shows Airbus's execution advantage. Both are trying to ramp up production, but neither can solve the backlog overnight. Their best defense is execution. Deliver on time, maintain quality, keep the technological edge. Make the C919 irrelevant by being the obviously better choice. In May 2025, the United States temporarily suspended the sale of LEAP 1C engines to China. The suspension was lifted in July 2025, but it highlighted a critical vulnerability. Export controls on critical components could cripple COMAC's production. If similar restrictions return, COMAC faces serious problems. China is developing the domestic CJ1000A engine, but it's years away from being production-ready and certified. So, Airbus and Boeing have tools beyond just building planes: political pressure, supply chain leverage, regulatory influence. They won't let China break the duopoly without a fight. Let's be clear, buying the C919 is risky. Unproven reliability record. It's only been flying commercially for 2 years. You don't know how it performs over a 20-year life cycle, maintenance costs, dispatch reliability, residual value. Parts and service network? If something breaks, can you get a replacement part quickly? COMAC doesn't have the global MRO network that Boeing and Airbus spent decades building. Resale value. If you need to sell or lease the aircraft later, who's buying? The secondary market for Chinese jets is essentially non-existent outside China. Technology obsolescence. If Western suppliers are cut off, whether by sanctions or export controls, can COMAC continue producing and supporting the aircraft? For a major carrier betting its entire fleet on the C919, probably too risky. But for diversification, buying a few dozen to operate on specific routes while maintaining a core Airbus or Boeing fleet, that calculation might make sense. Here's the fundamental shift. The C919 doesn't need to be better than the A320 or 737, it just needs to be good enough and available. For decades, airlines had no choice. Airbus or Boeing, that was it. The duopoly set prices, controlled delivery slots, and faced limited competitive pressure. Now, there's a third option. It's imperfect. It's not certified everywhere. It comes with risks. But it exists. And for airlines in certain markets, facing certain pressures, with certain political alignments, it's now viable. The order momentum is real, not massive, but building. And that momentum is what Boeing and Airbus are really worried about. Because once the C919 proves itself with a handful of foreign carriers, the credibility barrier drops. More airlines start considering it. The geopolitical calculations shift. So, what does success actually look like? Well, COMAC doesn't need to sell 5,000 C919s to succeed. They don't need to match Airbus's production rates or Boeing's installed base. Success is simpler. Become a legitimate third option in narrow-body aircraft. If the C919 captures even 10% of the global market for single-aisle jets over the next decade, that's hundreds of aircraft, thousands of routes, millions of passengers. It permanently changes the competitive landscape. Airbus and Boeing can no longer take their market dominance for granted. Pricing pressure increases, airlines gain negotiating leverage, and for China, it's proof of concept. If the C919 works, the next generation, the C929 widebody, already in development, becomes more credible. The entire Chinese aerospace ecosystem grows stronger. If EASA certification is achieved, the C919 becomes accessible to European carriers, fundamentally altering the market dynamics. That's the real threat. Not that the C919 destroys Airbus or Boeing, but that it cracks open a market that's been locked for decades and proves Chinese aerospace is viable. So, will every airline suddenly want the COMAC C919? No, not every airline, not suddenly, and not universally. But some airlines, particularly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, are absolutely considering it, and some will even buy it. The combination of desperate need for aircraft, attractive pricing, fast delivery, and geopolitical alignment is too compelling for certain carriers to ignore. The C919 might not dominate, but it doesn't have to. It just needs to survive, prove itself, and keep showing up. Because in an industry where two players have controlled everything for decades, simply existing as a credible alternative changes everything, and that change is already underway. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?